should be able to share information on North Korea's missiles and their tracks and respond accordingly.
Tensions are continuously rising in East Asia. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has accused Japanese ships of seriously violating China's sovereignty by sailing too close to the disputed deserted islands in the East China Sea. In the face of China's saber-rattling and threats made towards Taiwan, the historic turning of the page in South Korean-Japanese relations could prove crucial for the balance of power in the region.
Belgium's Court of Cassation has rejected appeals by MEPs Eva Kaili and Mark Tarabella against the extension of their pre-trial detention. The two will remain in custody in connection with an investigation by Belgian authorities into corruption in the European Parliament.
Thank you, President and colleagues.
Greek Socialist MEP and former MEP Vice President Eva Kaili was detained in December last year, while Belgian MEP Mark Tarabella was taken into custody in February as part of the same investigation. Kaili defended Qatar from criticism of its labor rights record as the World Cup was underway in the country. Only later was it revealed that she was receiving expensive gifts and thousands of euros in cash from Doha, likely for these statements.
ILO said that Qatar is a front-runner in labor rights, abolishing kafala and reducing minimum wage, despite the challenges that even European companies are denying to enforce these laws.
Both Kaili and Tarabella appealed the decision to the Belgian Court of Cassation. On Wednesday, the court rejected their appeals.
Petr Pavel was welcomed in the Polish capital with full military honors. One of the main goals of the visit was to show that Central Europe continues to stand united with Ukraine. The trip also brought a rather unexpected announcement.
Within the next few days, we will donate 4 aircraft to Ukraine in full working order. The rest are undergoing servicing and necessary preparations for flight duty. Once that's done, they will be gradually turned over.
The aircraft in question are MiG-29 fighter jets, which the Ukrainians know well, having had a fleet of their own. This means they can start flying combat sorties from day one, without the need for additional training for Ukrainian pilots. Apart from new help to Kyiv, the discussions were centered around security in Europe, as well as Polish-Czech cooperation within NATO and the European Union.
There have not been such good relations between the Czech Republic and Poland in the entire history of our relations. This is also due to the ongoing war in Ukraine. We all understood well what the right values are and what the value of cooperation with our allies and friends is.
It's Petr Pavel's second trip abroad since taking office 1 week ago. The first was to Slovakia, which shares strong cultural and historical ties with the Czech Republic, and is also a traditional first destination for new Czech presidents. Pavel announced his willingness to visit Poland already during the presidential campaign. It's a symbol of new possibilities in Polish-Czech relations.
Three countries are lobbying the bloc to lower the EU prices paid on a barrel of oil for Russia in order to limit the cash flowing into the Russian state coffers, which currently amounts to $135 million a day. The cap stands at $60 a barrel. However, prices have changed since then. Will the Poles, Estonians and Lithuanians succeed in their attempt? And what's at stake? To discuss this, I'm joined by Ivan Ulises Kentros-Klish, Research Fellow at the International Centre for Defence and Security in Tallinn. Ivan, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we go any further, I have a quote here from the Estonian Premier, if we can just listen to that.
Fresh data shows that Russia's oil and gas revenues decreased by nearly half in February compared to last year. EU and G7 oil price cap is making an impact. Time to review and lower it further to cut Russia's ability to wage war against Ukraine.
So time to lower that cap. What kind of money is at stake here? Can that really actually shear much of the amount that the Russians are actually making on oil?
Well, one important thing to consider is that Russia is, by its economic structure, essentially a petrostate, or a state that depends overwhelmingly on energy exports. This includes gas as well, of course. There are other industries such as the arms industry, grain industry, other commodities, but energy is the main source of revenue for the Russian state, for the Russian government in general. It finances really everything in Russia, between the military, the public administration, all sorts of things. So impacting their revenue and their ability to raise money through the sale of energy will have a comprehensive impact across the Russian economy. Now, the question is, what's the right level between, when it comes to the price cap, there's the argument that if it's put too low, then that will have that will impact international markets. But if it's too high, then Russia will continue to be able to have enough of a revenue from energy exports to finance its war against Ukraine.
Right, of course. Now, I suppose the thing is that at some stages last year, Europe was essentially held to ransom by the Russians with the prices that they were charging, and then selling cheap to countries like India and China. Now, who is still buying Russian oil at the moment and Russian products? Because sanctions have chopped away at that significantly, haven't they?
Indeed, they have. Right now, it's become a very muddled picture when it comes to Russian energy exports, because indeed the biggest buyers right now are countries are India, China, the two larger purchasers. But a lot of that oil is being re-exported by them to third countries, and it's becoming harder to keep track really of where this oil ends up at, and that diminishes the effectiveness of sanctions and of other policies to diminish Russia's exports.
Of course, because I mean, one thing is that Russian oil is the kind of almost the best source for diesel, isn't it? Oil isn't like like one product. It's a bit like different types of alcohol. You have cider and Guinness. They're different, and it's the same with oil. And we have kind of made our economy dependent on diesel in many cases.
Yeah, exactly. Our society, kind of our modern civilization, kind of depends on energy, on fossil oils still. So alienating a major producer such as Russia is an incredibly difficult task. So it's in a way commendable that how far we've come from speaking of how impossible it would be to wean off from imports from Russian energy in Europe and many other countries. But we've proven that that's a possibility now in the face of Russia's war against Ukraine.
Indeed. And how much oil is actually coming through the Druzhba, the Friendship pipeline, and other pipelines into Europe at the moment?
I don't have the precise numbers, but it's been some of the oil has continued to come in, some of the gas has continued to come in, but it's been diminishing quite substantially throughout last year. Europe went from being the top customer of Russian energy to becoming a marginal one at this point. Now,
the three countries which are looking to pass this legislation, what brings them together and who might object?
What's bringing them together is that they are essentially frontline states. I'm speaking from Estonia, and we've had a long history of facing Russian interference of many ways, especially since 2007 with the Bronze Soldier incident. So we are aware that Russia is having an aggressive foreign policy towards its neighbors here in Europe and frankly throughout the world. So the hope is that this price cap will further diminish the Russian state revenue and send a strong message that its aggression against Ukraine is not something admissible and not something that they can really get any victory from.
Of course, now some of the Polish refineries have been taking Russian oil. At the end of February, that Druzhba pipeline was cut off because the paperwork apparently was not right, according to the Russian side. And the Lithuanian refineries also use a certain amount of Russian oil. But are they less dependent than countries which maybe would object to this kind of ban? Who objects?
The objection, in my understanding, is mostly coming from the G7 group of countries, because in the argument that I've read and I found is that they believe that if a lower price cap, and in this case a much lower price cap, is imposed, this will disturb the markets and it will raise the price of energy for consumers all around. This is an argument that we heard before with previous price caps and previous policies restraining the purchase of Russian energy, and it certainly there was a shock in the energy prices, but by now it's returned to the levels prior to the full-scale invasion, and this has to do with many factors. One of them are these policies to limit Russian state revenue, but there's other factors at play, such as the harshness of the winter, the actual demand, and other sources of supply that are producing more or less, such as in Norway. Or I can mention also all the deals that the European Union and its member states have pursued in other countries.
Yes. Now, the lowering of the price of oil doesn't seem to have a huge effect on the price of petrol. People going to the pumps don't actually see much of a difference, even as we watch the price of oil going down recently. Could this legislation actually help to lower those prices?
This is a question that goes a bit beyond my knowledge. I think. But
you buy petrol.
No, certainly. No, of course. And I think consumers will indeed be wondering precisely this, but what's the impact going to be on the usual prices? I think we can just look at the experience with the previous fluctuations in the market, and in a way, whatever shift comes, we're not powerless in a sense.
Indeed. Now, meanwhile, back at home in Russia, how has the slight depletion of those revenues from those very high levels last year, and of course other sanctions, how are they affecting the Russian economy? We hear different viewpoints on this.
Indeed, and I think the effect is hard to pin down to one result, let's say, because supermarket shelves are still full in the main cities. You can still get many